Well, almost 2 years of conflict has led to massive losses for Ukraine's economy. The fighting has cost the country about 15 years of developmental gains. That information coming from the World Bank. More than 7 million Ukrainians now also live in poverty. Still, the bank says Ukraine remains resilient. The country's economy likely grew 3.5% last year and is forecast to grow between 3 and 5% in 2024. The report cites donor support, a more stable power supply, and increased government spending. Okay, for more on Ukraine's economy, we're joined by Aurel Braun. Aurel's a professor of international relations and political science at the University of Toronto. Aurel, good to see you again. Thanks very much for coming in, and kind of want to cut right to this. I thought that piece by Megumi Lim was very good, seeing these little slices of everyday life, and the fact that people can travel from cities to the front line to see their husband is somewhat chilling. So what is everyday life like across Ukraine nowadays?
It's difficult. There's no hiding that. The internal displacement, the loss of so much of the economic potential, the difficulty of boosting external trade because trade routes have been blocked in the Black Sea. All of these have created enormous difficulties for Ukraine. But what is also remarkable at the same time is that the country continues to function, that people go to work, that the soldiers are able to go to the front lines, that the government remains in place, that the military continues to fight. And if we put this into the larger context of what Russia tried to achieve, the words from Vladimir Putin that Ukraine is not a real country, that the government of Ukraine should not exist, this kind of defies that assessment, and it speaks to the future because the present indeed seems bleak. So in a sense, we have to find a way to speak meaningfully about what is winning and what is losing.
Now, let's talk about the state of Western aid for Ukraine. Here, of course, an ugly but not unexpected political fight in Congress trying to get billions of dollars of support. But what is the state of Western assistance like for Ukraine?
Europe has really done remarkable things in changing things around. The European Union has approved over $50 billion worth of aid, and that is a lot of money. It's going to be coming in over the next number of years. But Ukraine also needs help from the United States. And as we know, something like $60 billion is being held up in Congress. And this is hurting Ukraine. It's hurting Ukraine because this package also includes military aid that they desperately need. But we see many other countries stepping up, not just Europe, but also Japan coming with increased aid. And there is an increased recognition that this fight is not only about Ukraine, that so many other countries have an interest in this, that democracies have an interest in it, and other countries too that want to see international stability are engaged in this fight. And this is why when we look at what is winning, what is losing, we have to somehow recalibrate. We have to look at the asymmetry that exists between Russia, which pretends to be a superpower, but it isn't, and Ukraine, a much smaller entity. And in that sense, if Ukraine doesn't lose, it wins. If Russia doesn't win, it loses.
Let's talk about the outlook for more sanctions, because it seems that that could well be on the way for Putin over the death of Navalny. Do you think that's going to happen?
There are undoubtedly going to be more sanctions. And sanctions are not going to bring Russia to a standstill. Sanctions cannot do that. That is not the historic sanctions. But if sanctions are combined with effective military help and large-scale economic aid to Ukraine, then they can have a corrosive effect that in the longer term can very badly damage the Russian economy. And we're seeing that already in the case of Russia, that there is a great deal of inflation. And when Russia and Russian officials speak about economic growth in Russia, that growth is largely by expenditures or fueled by expenditures on the military and on military industries, and that doesn't come to the consumer, it doesn't come to the people. So it's not the kind of growth, even if we accept Russian figures, which are not always reliable, that help Russia become a modern, successful, competitive state.
Oh.
And in that sense, Russia is a needy state.
Right. Or I kind of want you to kind of compare and contrast Ukraine's economy, which has grown, which I was actually surprised finding out earlier in the day. What has led it to grow? And certainly there are champions across the world that are cheering when they hear this news, to Moscow's economic situation.
Moscow obviously has a lot of energy, and they're generating funds, and India is buying oil, and so that sort of fills up the coffers. But the long term doesn't look very good. Whereas in the case of Ukraine, if they survive, the long term is encouraging because people from elsewhere want to invest. There is confidence in the government. There is a very strong effort to fight corruption in Ukraine, and that is not the same in the case of Russia. And we see how NATO states now have very sharply increased defense expenditures and how they are building up or rebuilding their military industrial capacity. And that's very bad news for Russia. We see that Finland is already a member of NATO, and Sweden will be one soon.
Let's talk about Ukraine's reconstruction process. I know it may seem crazy early to talk about it at this point, but obviously Zelensky wants to have that in the pipeline. He wants to give his people something to look forward to. What does the reconstruction process look like?
They have to move across the entire spectrum. So they have to be able to get their agricultural exports out. And obviously there's some friction with Polish farmers, and that has to be resolved. They have to find secure routes to get those goods out to the world, because there is also a food crisis in parts of the developing world, and Ukraine is a huge agriculture producer. But also in terms of industrial capacity, not only is Ukraine now building a capacity to have weapons constructed within Ukraine, but also they are building power plants. They are creating a lot more flexibility. They are encouraging entrepreneurs. And so when the situation stabilizes, if they are able to stabilize it, the next 6 to 8 months are very dangerous, because if somehow Ukraine collapses, then all this will be gone. But if it survives the next 6 to 8 months, then I think things will change around. Investments will pour into Ukraine. And we've seen what happened in Eastern Europe.
Right.
That when those investments came in and they were used productively, they really turned those economies around. And you have Poland and the Czech Republic and Hungary, and they're thriving. And so Ukraine could do the same thing. And there's also word now that there may be a greater inclination to try to seize some of the assets that are locked down, that Russia has, something like $300 billion, at least use the interest, and that might be transferred to Ukraine. So there are a great many things happening, and so it's a matter of, do we look at the short term, where the situation is rather bleak, or do we look at the long term, that if Ukraine survives, then Ukraine may indeed have a very good future.